The following program does not necessarily represent the views and opinions of Reality Radio 101, its advertisers and sponsors, or its listening audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with psychologist, author, and speaker, Dr. Anna Baranowski, where mind, mood, and what matters to you are discussed. We're broadcasting live from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, on Reality Radio 101. Our email address is instudio101@gmail.com. And now, your host of the Bear Psychology Radio Show, Dr. Anna Baranowski.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be back with you again today, where we discuss the topics of the day. And today's topic of the day, as it relates to our ongoing psychological conversation, is from the work of Dr. Jacqueline Heller, who is the best-selling author of Yesterday Never Sleeps: How Integrating Life's Current and Past Connections Improves Our Well-Being. It's a very interesting book because it really covers this very kind of relationship-focused issue around how we can get in trouble with the past and how that can pour into the future, and how we can have these patterns that are really all about our history actually start to impair us from having the best kind of relationships today. So we're very fortunate to have Dr. Jacqueline Heller with us, and we're going to learn about what we need to do to better understand what's going on underneath the surface, and how learning about that can help us improve relationships, increase our empathy and understanding of other people around us, and, maybe even help us be a little bit closer to the people that are around us, so that we're not simply going on past hurts, but really refreshing ourselves and our relationships with others, becoming more accepting and more peaceful of our own inner landscape, topic that you've all heard me talk about many, many times. So it makes this topic very interesting to me because there's two things that really stand out. One being patterns, and I love patterns and how they impact our relationships and our relationship with ourselves even more so than any other. And this idea of how, the past can pour into the present. And it seems that the work of Dr. Heller really fits well with that. Dr. Heller, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? I want to welcome you and introduce you to the audience. And maybe you can just tell us a little bit about yourself, your history, and what made you write Yesterday Never Sleeps. Welcome to the show.
Well, I'm a board certified psychiatrist and neurologist, and I'm a psychoanalyst. So I have an interesting kind of perspective because I have an amalgam of experience in therapy and in medicine, and in psychoanalysis. So they're kind of an interesting combination. I am currently retired, but I worked most of my life in psychiatry. And what drove me to write the book was actually my mother's death, which was kind of traumatic for me in a sense, because we were very close and I had her for a long time, and it was right before COVID. And I never used to journal, but I always understood the importance of consolidating memory and writing and having a narrative. And I became much more interested in narrative coherence and creating a self-story that was, important, cogent, replicable, and kind of spans the life course. I had also, in my later life, I had trained at an attachment theory-oriented institute to become a parent and parent-child counselor for reflective parenting, for good connections and for healthy connections and attachments. So after my mother died, I started writing a little bit, and I answered family questions about family history. People became more interested when there's a loss. Often there's questions about who was grandma and who was grandpa. And so I spoke to the grandchildren, my nieces and nephews, and they found it to be extremely helpful in helping them understand their narrative and their own relationships with their own parents and their own history. And I've always liked doing that. So I'm a storyteller, and I became very interested in sort of my own story. It just unfolded organically. I was not planning to write the book.
Wow. Well, and also this is a history that has some really deep layers of trauma to it. So
That's true.
the fact that you were able to share that family history with, grandchildren or nieces or nephews, who were very interested in that storyline. And I find that very compelling, because when we have these troubled elements to our story, from a perspective of epigenetics, this can really pour into other family members. How did that play out with sharing with this younger generation your particularly personally traumatic history?
Well, the younger generation is privy to it, and the memories get passed down. Some of the behaviors do too. So by direct experience, by direct exposure. So, for example, as we know, traumatic memory lays down very differently than healthy memory, normal memory, and that gets passed on. So, I found that my nieces and nephews who knew my mother, for example, my mother lived much longer than my father. My mother was a Holocaust survivor, so was my dad. But my mother lived to be 93, and she knew her grandchildren as grown people. And some of the effects get transmitted, and some of them get transmitted without ever having any discussion about them. So, so she has direct effect on multiple generations. But it's very quirky how these things get passed on. And I think if we understand them better, it'll really promote empathy and sympathy and compassion amongst the younger generations, which can help break the cycle of passing on trauma. And that's why my book focuses on self-reflection and introspection and what that does to your heart and mind and brain and body and spirit, which is a lot.
Well, I wonder if it's possible for you to speak a little bit more about this coherent narrative self-storying that you did yourself. You said your mother had died, and it was an impulse inside of you to start writing. How did that come about, and what exactly did you do? And I'm going to just make a note for our wonderful audience that please do email us if you have questions or you're wanting to share something at instudio101@gmail.com. We love your emails, and they're always so interesting. So please do that as well. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you did, what this narrative, this coherent narrative self-storying was comprised of.
I mean, I think attachment theory teaches us that, having a coherent narrative, knowing your story from beginning to middle to end and updating it constantly, automatically, hopefully that's the best habit to form, is to be able to know what's going on internally and have a part of yourself that's an objective, neutral observer that can talk to yourself and calm you down and reflect on what's going on and make connections. And I think the more we make these internal connections to our past life, I mean, to this life, but to the past, to history, as things come up for us, the more divergent our thinking gets, the more creative we get, the more opportunities we have to change our hardened, rigid constructs and look at new options and new possibilities. So that's something I've been trained to do, and I've actually been doing it my whole life, kind of unknowingly. I did that as a child. I mean, I practiced my day every night. I had a mental diary, and I pruned to the things that didn't seem relevant, and I tried to rework the things that seemed important.
Well, it sounds a little bit like creating this adult voice, which is a construct that they use in early maladaptive schemas. And I think, you also have some overlap with that early maladaptive schemas, that concept, that construct. You use something similar, automatic mental constructs. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I mean, it's my way of consolidating different theories. It comes from the psychoanalytic idea of compromise formations and this is based on a Freudian model of the mind, not a theoretical so much as kind of, well, theoretical model of the mind in the sense that he was right about the unconscious, and that we have we have an ego, an id, and a superego. We can call them whatever we want. We can call them my voice of reason, my voice of moral and ethical codes and social expectations, and we can call it my wishes and my desires. We can, whatever language we want to use, the terminology, but the idea of an unconscious mind and that we harbor deep-seated wishes, fears, longings, and past experiences and memories that we bury. And that we need to be aware of them because they can come back and bother us because they're stuck in these repetitive patterns of behavior. So it's very similar. It just has the idea that there are warring factions within us, and we need to kind of create this community of talking parts of ourselves that can connect and then, train us to manage our emotions, the amygdala and the part of the brain that's very reactive, and calm ourselves down through mindfulness and meditation and all of those things that you know so much about. So an automatic mental construct is a schema that's fixed and rigid and that you go to automatically before thinking, and that includes responding to triggers without sense, and having poor judgment or recreating painful experiences, repeating them over and over again.
Which everybody seems to do, even if we have some pretty good self-reflective approaches. So, I mean,
that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think it's really
because we're human. Because we're human.
Exactly,
and
I
we're very
think
fallible.
It's really easy when we hear these psychological concepts that people sometimes think, oh well, I'll just do that thing and then I won't have to deal with this uncomfortable place that I automatically go to, and yet it's actually, I love that you said you do this self-reflection daily, regularly, before you go to sleep. You've taken on as a practice introspection, and that there's something really alive about that. It's not something that you do once and then you say, yes, well, I did my self-reflection, now I'm finished.
It's not a 10-step process. It's a way of life that should become automatic eventually. And frankly, children that have a good enough parent and have an attachment, healthy attachment to a figure that's been consistently nurturing, loving, containing them. People learn how to do this on their own, but not everyone's been so fortunate, and some people can't even identify their feelings. So, there's a stepwise process to doing this, which is very kind of basic, but it has to be something we do all the time. We have to develop a part of ourselves that's kind of a neutral observer that can talk to ourselves and talk to the parts of ourselves that are chattering negative things in our head and giving us, bad self-concepts. But basically the AMC includes all of your desires and your deep, dark fears and your hidden terrible memories of bad things that have happened. They also include good things too. We repress wonderful things also. It's not just the bad, good, it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. We repress all kinds of things, and it includes those warring factions within us that are, some are conscious, some are unconscious, some are on the periphery of consciousness, like a blind spot when you're driving. You kind of know it's there, but you still have to look and check things that are automatic, and it includes the defense mechanisms, the things we do to protect ourselves, and the struggle between those things. And the outcome of this mental mishmash is kind of the way we are. It's a symptom, it's a character trait, it's a way of being, the things that define us as individuals, our idiosyncrasies.
This idea of a neutral observer, can you say a little bit more about the neutral observer and how you might develop it or where it might come from?
Well, I mean, the way to develop is I think we call this mentalization in attachment theory. Mentalizing is basically being able to, you have to know yourself, so you have to know your own headspace, and then it's being able to consider another person or anything that you can hold on to, and imagine the scenario. It's kind of a mental role playing. It's kind of like being a fly on the wall. If you imagine yourself observing yourself, like the Truman Show, or or you're perched on a tree and you're looking, you have an aerial view. It's something you just have to practice doing. And you could practice it in writing by asking yourself a series of questions to get to know yourself to begin. But basically mindfulness, a mindful meditation that focuses on breathing, calms down your sympathetic nervous system, and you feel some calm, and you learn how to filter out thoughts and focus. That's a good way to start accessing these kind of feelings. There's no reason to go digging into the past. And the past, as you know, will find us if it's important. It's relevant. It knows where we are. That's what I mean by yesterday never sleeps, because the unconscious, it operates on by primary process thinking. It's not logical. It knows no reason. It's our dreams, basically. And if it's important, there will be triggers today that will, even little things that we're not aware of. And that's what we have to do. So we have to focus on breathing and relaxing. And we also have to focus on the visceral changes and actually make a concerted effort to think about how we think about our emotions. Am I angry? Am I sad? And what's the physical component? Do I have, butterflies in my stomach? Am I, struggling with a lump in my throat? Do I feel grief in my chest? Those kinds of things. And these are the important things to start doing this.
Yeah,
and there's nothing new about them. I mean, it's nothing novel that I've come up with.
No, but it's the kind of conceptualization of it, and again, it's coming back to the body sensation. And yes, that is something that we see more and more. In the past, there wasn't as much focus on that. But the fact that you say, those triggers are going to find you today, they find us wherever we are. That is just so absolutely correct. And then we fall into these unfortunate patterns that lead us towards relationship struggles and problems and triggers that keep us from having a kind of warmth in our connections, because we're easily hurt, and it's really not about this moment. It's about something that happened in the past, and how that can get us into so much trouble. And I think it's interesting. I had an exchange. I'm part of a number of different WhatsApp community connection groups, and one of my colleagues, she's also a psychologist, and just a brilliant, bright light, who was writing about something called kintsugi, which is this. It's a way of repairing broken pottery with gold kind of resin that you fix and reattach shattered pieces of pottery with, or fill in gaps and holes or chips from where it was missing in the original vessel. And something about repairing and restoring something that's lost with something that's new, this gold resin that strengthens the entire thing. And, you know, there's no attempt to hide the damage, which is what we all seem to do in you know, many of our lives. Is, you know, we want to pretend that we don't have any damage, and it's like that just isn't the case for anybody. We are all carrying these areas of damage. But you know, with this approach, this kintsugi, this Japanese word is kin means gold and sugi means join, and it's this Japanese tradition that is just so profoundly beautiful. So, you know, you get now this object that was even more beautiful and even stronger than before it was damaged. And it's just a beautiful thing to think of. So my colleague was saying, you know, she was with her father on his final day, just this January the 31st of 2024. And she'd been wanting to take this kintsugi program and kept missing it or kept filling out. And as she's sitting there with her father on his very final night, she gets an email to take this class, and she signs up, and it's like this beauty, like he was there helping her find something beautiful in the darkest night, like this broken thing that had an opportunity to mend her own heart, you know. And I was just so blown away by, you know, her story of her father and the kintsugi that she built. She sent me a bunch of pictures of this. And it just made me think a lot about relationship repair. And knowing that I was speaking with you today, I thought I would share that story because it was just so touching. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about relationship repair.
Well, it's a lovely story. It's very touching. And it's a very hopeful story, which is wonderful, because we need to have hope no matter what. Otherwise, we can't capitulate to despair. That doesn't get us anywhere. So I think, you know, the idea of a relationship rupture and repair is we have to learn how to, it sounds oxymoronic, but we have to learn how to fight well. We have to know how to have a good fight. And that means being, first of all, we have to know the other person. We have to know ourselves. Everything starts with knowing ourselves. I think Aristotle said wisdom begins with self-knowledge. And without that, and without having that introspective and self-reflective capacity, which actually correlates completely with secure attachments, the more reflective function, and the more you know yourself and you can reflect on your state of mind, your state of being, what your hangups are, the much better off we are in connecting well with other people and forming secure attachments with our children, with our spouses, with our lovers, whoever it may be, with our bosses, whatever it is, anywhere on any relationship. And you're much better at having good people radar, those kinds of things. So we're being able to fight well is being able to know that you've done something to hurt the other person. And that means you have to be tuned in, you have to be attuned, you have to be in sync in some way, and you have to be consciously curious. You have to want to know the other person. And I think you say something about this. I read, like, you call it bearing witness in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting you say that, because I'm writing a chapter for a book now called the Witness by Proxy. Because I'm bearing witness to being a child of Holocaust survivors as a second generation. Not that I lived through anything that my parents lived through, but I lived with them, and I lived with people that had PTSD, and it has a profound effect. So I'm bearing witness to being a child of, just like children of people that had COVID that were very, very sick will have to deal with the similar kinds of issues. So repair basically is about having conscious curiosity about the other, being attuned and validating their mind, validating the mind of the other, being able to first know that they have their own mind and their own point of view, being able to validate their feelings and their thoughts and their ideas, and knowing your own emotions so that you can understand their emotions, and then having compassion and empathy, and understanding the temperament of the other also, and being able to be there in the right kind of way. Now, this is something ideally, this is something a good therapist does, but it's something that good parents do too, because there will always be a mistake. But as long as you can recognize that, but it takes a lot of skill to, you have to have these qualities in order to repair rupture. If you're, if you're narcissistic and you have, major personality issues and you can't even know another person, or if you're traumatized, you can't put your own mask on. You're struggling with your sensations and your bodily and the intrusions of the past. You can't focus on helping someone else. So that makes for ineffective parenting and ineffective partners. So, I mean, those things need to be addressed at once. But basically, repairing ruptures is the most important thing, I think, to have good relationships, because we'll all be misattuned and screw up every day with any number of people. And
Without a doubt.
as long as you can say, I'm sorry, that's my issue, that had nothing to do with you, I apologize, please forgive me. Forgiveness is an important part of it too. But you have to forgive yourself first. So if you don't, you have to have self-compassion first to know that you screwed up and it's okay. And you just have to let the other person know. So there's a lot of ingredients to repair, but these are all very important and, they're salient.
I want to, it's very interesting. I want to come back in a minute to attachment styles, but I also want to bring in some of our listeners and read through some of the emails that we are getting. This one is from Steve, and he writes, yesterday, you'll like this one, I think. Yesterday Never Hurts is the best book that I ever read on the subject. Thank you for the interview, Steve from New York. Isn't that nice?
That's very nice. That's great. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, that's so lovely. And, it seems that you've got people who have already read your book who are listening today. So that's fantastic. And this one is from Tate. And Tate says, hello, first off, I cannot believe that Dr. Heller is retired, as she looks so young in her promotional photographs. So there you go. Good genes. Secondly, are any problems that we have mentally as adults directly related to our childbearing years? So can you talk a little bit about that from your perspective?
Anything we have mentally, we're dealing with.
I will repeat it. Sorry, this is from Tate, and Tate asks, are any problems that we have mentally, I guess that's mentally or emotionally as adults, directly related to our childbearing years?
I'm not sure how to answer that. That's kind of an interesting joining of things. Mental is a big word. It means a lot of things. It means emotional states. It means moods. It means disorders, psychiatric disorders. I'm not a big proponent of the term mental health, because mental health is brain health, it's body health, it's emotional health, it's all kinds of things that go into that. But nothing specifically that I can think of other than like postpartum depression or, physical changes that are hard for people to deal with, the changes in family structure between partners when there's a child that's born. I mean, there's many, many avenues to take this question. There's many directions we can go. So I'm not sure if there's a more specific question.
Right. And so I will invite Tate, if you want to send another email just to clarify what you're looking for here, that would be great as well. And we'd be happy to read that if we have time as well. So please feel free to do that. Thank you.
Maybe meant epigenetically. I'm not sure. I mean, my mind's going on with it, but
let's see what now you're going to start tracking it, and it brings some things up for me in terms of just what might be going on a hormonal level for any individual, and the risks of postpartum depression, or anything that might be going on for the individual, or if the family setting or the family dynamic is very difficult, then of course there would be potential problems that could come to the surface as well during a period of time like that, if the mother, for example, is not properly supported in her role. There could be other fundamental issues that certainly get reignited, especially if there are re-triggering elements. For example, if you have had a specific experience in your own childhood, and now you are a mother and you are seeing certain things or experiencing certain things that are reflective or triggering from an earlier part of your life, then certainly you may find yourself having to deal with something that is evocative for you. And it's a game. It's that past is pouring into the present that, if you didn't have a certain kind of past, the triggers that are going on today may not be as explosive for you. So, just kind of add that into your thinking as well. And this is from Chuck. Chuck says, hello, and this is not a joke question. Talking to ourselves is a good thing, question. And I'm going to let you start with that first, Dr. Heller.
That's a great question because, there are dangers in talking to ourselves, because if we have a lot of negative chatter in our head, then that's problematic. Then we can just reinforce that. I think that's probably what you're getting at, Chuck. So yes, it's yes and no. I mean, if you have a very negative self-image and you have very low self-esteem and you're beating yourself up, or you are hallucinating and hearing voices yelling at you and telling you bad things about yourself, or even just if you have inner chatter, inner voices that are very negative, then talking to yourself is not good in that sense, if that's where you're going with it. But the idea is with the help of a therapist, maybe if that's the situation, is with the help of a compassionate, caring therapist who's knowledgeable to help you refocus and switch some of your negative self-commentary and create a part of yourself that's much more compassionate and self-loving, and allows it to take a minute when the negative chatter continues to say, okay, I'm going to enlist my inner sage, my kind neutral judge, and I'm going to keep that part of myself watching the situation, and I'm going to try to eliminate these thoughts and replace them with worthwhile, whatever the construct is that you have in your mind. That's where automatic mental constructs come up. But even being aware of them is a big step. Most people aren't. I mean, 90% of what we do is unconscious. 90% of our thoughts and our actions are basically lower and midbrain that are emotionally driven, or just automatic functions like our heart rate, our blood pressure, our physiologic functions. They're out of our awareness. So I think we need to become a little bit more humble about what we know and what we don't know, and not be afraid to visit these depths of our psyche. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, yes, you're right. It's not good for us if we're just basically have negative chatter. We need to get some help to do that, to steer us away from that. And there's lots of ways to do that,
and there's such a big difference between just letting the mental chatter drive anger, frustration, hate even, as opposed to just noticing that we do have this negative mental chatter and noticing, wow, hey, look at that. I mean, I've got this voice that says everybody dislikes me, or, I'm not worthy of love, or whatever, negative things you may be saying to yourself. One thing is saying, wow, that is so interesting. I'm noticing that surfacing. And another thing is like, oh, wow, I am a terrible person. And so living your life through that version, or the mistaken version of the universe. These things are very different. It's a great question, Chuck. Thank you for posting that. And here is another one. This is very interesting. This is from Irene, and Irene says, a question for Dr. Heller. A lot of my friends have told me that I am a narcissist. If true, which I do not think I am, could it be because of my past?
Well, narcissist is a big word. I mean, we're born as young children. When you're 3 years old, you're supposed to be a narcissist. You're supposed to twirl around in your tutu and say, look, mommy, look at me, and get really annoyed when your mom's doing something else, because the world revolves around you. So healthy narcissism is very important for self-esteem and confidence later in life. And we want to encourage healthy narcissism. When narcissism goes awry, it's usually because of ruptures that are not dealt with and they're not taken care of. Whether they're physiological underpinnings, there must be, but that's a whole nother can of worms. I mean, we're living in an age of molecular genetics, and all personality disorders will ultimately be understood on a molecular level. But But to say, how do you know if you're a narcissist? Well, I think it's important to see what the patterns are that people are talking about. What do they see in you that you're not missing, and what do you think they're wrong about? I mean, there's tons of literature on narcissism, and usually it means that someone, you're talking about a personality disorder, or do they mean it as a trait? The language gets conflated. Diagnostic terminology gets used as simple adjectives or nouns. So I'm not sure what they even mean by you're being a narcissist. Are they saying that they know what a narcissistic personality disorder is, which has a complex number of criteria that go with it? Or are they just saying that you're selfish? Because often people just mean you're selfish or you're vain or you're too focused on external things. That's my question back to you in order to continue to answer your question clearly.
Well, and that is really a great response. And I think people do make a lot of assumptions about what narcissism may or may not be. And it's like, I love this idea of, being in the tutu and saying, Mom, Mom, watch me. And, what happens when we don't get our needs met, or what happens when we're getting our needs met to such a degree that, we believe that in every single situation, regardless of what is happening, we should be the center of attention. How does a personality like that get developed? Just on another point, for those who are interested in narcissism specifically, there are some excellent books out there on the market, but there's also some resources that are easily available that are open source, like the Narcissistic Personality Inventory. It's a narcissism test. It's easy to find. And it does give you a pretty good breakdown of the areas that you might want to contemplate. It's very easy to find online, Narcissistic Personality Inventory, and you can just get your own results and get a sense of where do you land and why might that actually be of any interest to you. It's worth contemplating, what does it really look like? The other thing that I really suggest that's very, very interesting is the work by Dr. Craig Malkin, Malkin, and he's written some very interesting things on narcissism that are really worth looking a little bit closer. His book, Rethinking Narcissism, is probably one of my favorite. And he writes a lot about, how to figure out, what you referenced a minute ago. Do you have elements of healthy narcissism? Are you high in this kind of malignant narcissism? Or do you have a tendency towards egoism, which is really, your self-esteem is so low that you're constantly looking at other people to kind of feel better about your needs, or address your needs through another person's attention and awareness, like that they think you're okay because you're supporting them. Great question.
That's a whole nother interesting topic.
It is, and
social referencing.
Exactly. And this is where we can just go on and on. I mean, it just makes it so interesting, and the questions make it so incredibly kind of useful for kind of focusing the conversation. The other thing, yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say one thing that binds and unifies all of these concepts of illness and wellness and health in emotional life is that the brain really responds. There's parts of the brains that is fed and responds by neuroplasticity, by growing more bundles of nerves and making more connections in all these areas that promote confidence, self-esteem. I mean, the prefrontal cortex, the area between your eyes and your outer part of the brain, is the one that is responsible for these kinds of social connections, being socially cognizant of having self-reflective ability, being able to look at yourself, being able to be reasonable and have good reality testing and good executive function all around, good judgment, good planning, good sequencing. All this kind of stuff that we know are these higher order cognitive functions come from mindful self-reflection and being able to go inward and know your feelings and then think about them and annotate them and then that helps marshal raw emotion that triggers people to respond without thinking. And so all of these things can be helped by this kind of mellow kind of reflecting and making these connections. And the more you make these connections to your past, meaning, I mean, I can give you some personal examples, because
Oh, please do.
stories help understand these things. I mean, I can give you examples of all of these things, but let me just give you an example from my own life, because it'll be brief. My father was a Holocaust survivor, and he had very difficult early life circumstances. He was effectively double orphaned by the time he was 6 or 7. He was kind of a street urchin. He was kind of left to his own devices. He had one sister that helped him when she could and loved him very much. And I was her spitting image. She was killed by the Nazis in Poland. And I knew she was dead. I mean, I knew about all this stuff when I was way too young. But when I was little, and my dad loved me very much, and he was a very loving man, but he used to hug me and kiss me and squeeze me like he'd start to hurt. You know, it was like a little bit constricting. And I'd say, "Dad, don't hug so hard." And he would look at me and he'd start to cry. And I thought, oh my God, and as a narcissistic 3-year-old or 5-year-old, I'd say, what did I do wrong? And he was self-reflective enough. He was a very people-oriented person. He had good people skills. And he said, "Sweet, it has nothing to do with you. You just look exactly like my sister." And they killed her. And it makes me sad sometimes. So we all know what that's like, to look at someone that reminds you of someone that you've lost, or someone that you're divorced from, or someone that's related to you that you don't get along with. So that was kind of very helpful. That kind of self-reflection on the part of the parent is required to have a good relationship with the child. And if the parent doesn't have that and they're dismissive, then you make that you can help create a narcissistic child who has a depleted kind of narcissism, who needs to constantly be mirrored and become looked at and and validated. But if you validate these kinds of feelings, and the child can understand the difference between you and them, then that's repairing a rupture too, in a sense. So I just wanted to give you that kind of example. And then, of course, I learned much later on, in recent years, my sister told me that not only was she killed, he witnessed her being murdered, and then he witnessed her being decapitated. And I can only imagine his flashbacks of looking at me and seeing my head roll off my body, and how horrifying that could be. And the fact that he kept that detail from me shows good judgment also. So these kinds of things are very important, and they affect generations to come. And as loving as a parent might be, as you said earlier, Anna, we just make mistakes, because if we don't know what we're doing, we don't know ourselves and our history and how it affects us, we just pass it on.
That's such a touching personal story, Jackie. Thank you for sharing it. I find it a little heart-wrenching. It's both sweet. It is sweet. It's both sweet and so very, very sad and tragic at the same time. And it's beautiful that your father had you to, have that depth of connection and to feel his own repair, to have created his own family. I mean, when you think about that kind of level of tragedy and loss and terror, and then being able to go on and marry and have your own children and grandchildren.
Remarkable.
It is remarkable.
He was remarkable. I have a chapter about him that I call the unsung hero, because he was a remarkable person and what he could accomplish, and the success he created in having a successful life. So there's a hopeful story.
And that's where you really see, like, what kind of resiliency could occur for an individual who takes the time to know themselves well enough. What does that really take, for this man to have lived through so much loss and tragedy and trauma, and then be able to come out of it and say, yes, I'm looking forward and I'm creating a life beyond what I had experienced. It's just such a profoundly beautiful story. And it doesn't end with this terrible thing that he saw and the loss of his sister. It continues through the generations. So thank you. Thank you so much for writing that book and sharing that story and sharing so much of the personal elements of it as well. I just want to repeat this for our listeners. This is Dr. Jacqueline Heller, and her book is Yesterday Never Sleeps. And she's infused the book with many stories, not just her own personal stories. I just finished it, but also stories of her clients, the elements of attachment theory and, the Freudian work and, perspectives that we don't always hear about today because we seem to be so much focused on cognitive behavioral therapy, and it really loses the depth that you can get out of some of these older writings and teachings. And they're, really profound and worth spending the time contemplating. Here's another question. This is, the question is Dr. Heller actually talking about meditation? So I think the reference is when you were talking before about self-reflection, that we had talked about, and introspection.
Well, I'm not actually talking about meditation per se, but I'm talking about a meditative contemplative practice, which, I think meditation is great and meditation is important, but yes, a mindful meditation, which allows you to hone your focus and get to a state of flow where you don't really have awareness of detailed things, thoughts coming and going all the time. Or if they do, you can let them go and you can just focus on your consciousness. And in that sense, that allows for connections to be made, because you start, it's like a dream state almost. I mean, dreams are very important because dreams clarify for us the triggers in our life that are ever present and the ones that are immediate. Yeah, I do mean meditation. There's so many different kinds of meditation, but the idea is to just let yourself relax so that you can see what comes to mind. I mean, we call it mindful meditation. When we speak to our therapist, we call it free association. Just see what comes into your mind, and while you're focusing on your meditation to get into a calm state, you set those thoughts aside for later. Later, you can start to really think about them. And writing helps too. I mean, writing meditation, moving meditation, Tai Chi, writing a journal, or even just thinking about something that comes up. And so, yeah, it is. I'm not talking about traditional Eastern meditation, which is very different. I mean, everyone talks about mindfulness. I just listened to Daniel Goleman, who's the founder of social emotional intelligence, say, there's a MIC mindfulness expansion. We have a MIC mindfulness where it's basically just you're just breathing and just breathe and relax. We focus on calming the autonomic nervous system, but in Eastern tradition, it was much more than that. It was reaching a state of oneness. There's a whole spiritual aspect. And it was also very important as far as being good for the mind and good for the brain, which it is. So it puts you into a state where it allows you to use the upper parts of the brain, the outer parts of the brain, as opposed to the emotional. And it helps calm the amygdala and all the circuits that are intensely emotional.
Very interesting. This is from George, who says, so we should do this self-analysis to ourselves often, even if so, how exactly? I love that question.
Well, if you practice mindfulness, even just 5 minutes of, calming yourself down, if you want to put yourself in that standpoint. If you just try to relax and you move your attention to different parts of your body, almost like even if it's a progressive relaxation, just to see what emotions you have, what might you be feeling. If let's say you've set 3 times a day that you're going to just think about yourself and what's going on within your body and your mind, and let's say there are transition points, like when you're on your way out to work, or when you get to the office, or when you come home, or when you're getting ready for bed. Use those transition points, or you just left a meeting and you may be aware, you may not be aware. I mean, I'm very self-aware about these things. So if I just had lunch with someone and I was in a great mood before, and I come home and I feel a little down and I feel a little upset and I don't know why, I'll think about, well, what just happened? What happened at lunch? And I'll think, okay, well, I saw my friend, and she's kind of good at half, at backhanded compliments. And she said, "Oh, you look great. Your hair will grow back. It's, not the best haircut, but it'll grow back." The good thing about your bad haircut is that your hair will grow back. So, and I thought, well, that wasn't so nice. Maybe my hair is not so good. And so that was a little dispiriting, but I was aware of it. So, if you're not aware of these things, they come back at you. So I'm not saying you should do self-analysis, but in a way, yes, in a way, not being, if you know yourself, you're not going to make the same mistakes. Listen, I'll tell you a quick story. And in 2019, I was with my grandson. After in the afternoon, we went to lunch, and I walked into a little store because went back to the car with our friend, and he was going to take a nap. And basically, to make a long story short, the salesperson that was helping me, Dana, left the store. I didn't know about it. I came out of the fitting room. There was no one there. The store was abandoned. And it was weird. I stayed there for 45 minutes to man the register because they left everything unlocked and open. And I came back later when I was going back to the car. I did some other shopping, and I noticed there was a commotion there, and I walked in. There's 6 police officers there. And I said, "Oh my God, what happened?" I knew something was wrong because the salespeople left this little boutique. And the officer said to me, "Ma'am, were you in the fitting room 45 minutes ago?" I said, "Yes." "Are you carrying a firearm?" I said, "What? Me? Me, I'm like this slight, like older person with my grandchild in tow." "No, of course not." I said, "What's that in your pocket?" As the female officer was coming to frisk me. And I reflexively put my hand in my slip pocket of my jacket, and I pulled, as I did that, he took his gun out, and they took their guns out. I'm like, oh my God, I was freaking out. This was a very traumatic moment. And I probably don't even remember it that well, but in my mind, all 5 of them took their guns out and were pointing them at me. And I thought, oh my God, they're going to kill me. This is the craziest thing in the world. And it turns out that it was my car key that the female officer removed from my pocket. It's my car key. It looked nothing like a gun, but it was a small black object that had a little leather on it. And I suppose it could have looked like a pistol or something. I don't know. I don't know what guns look like up close. And it turns out that this girl, this young woman, had terrible gun trauma when she was a child, and she witnessed gun violence, and she had a knee-jerk reaction and called 911 when she saw my key in my pocket, thinking I had a gun. And it was just very poor judgment because I wasn't threatening. I was just a person who went in there, and she just had this automatic trigger, this rigid idea that anyone that looks like they have something that could be a weapon is going to be used against her. And so there's an example of just very bad judgment. So yes, some self-analysis would have been good had she known that she was sensitive to this, and she should ask me. I mean, it just wasn't good judgment. She was half my age, she was twice my size, and I was nicely dressed with a toddler. Like, what are you thinking, right? So there's a striking example.
It's like what you described before, that really it's the unconscious mind. She wasn't thinking, it happened automatically, but it was this content that wasn't available to her until just the right person showed up at the right moment, and she took a look at you and had this reactive moment that it probably happened so quickly she didn't really have time to really contemplate or think in the raw moment of the time. It's like what you described before. You were sitting with your friend, and she says, "Oh, well, too bad about, your hair will grow back. You look great, but, too bad about your hair."
Right.
And, it's not until you get home that you say, "Well, why am I feeling so bad?" And you do this beautiful self-reflection, and you start to come to your own truth and a realization. And, hopefully you were able to do some repair with your friend, or maybe not, because
No.
some moments in time don't require that.
Correct.
It's really
Everyone's entitled to a slip of the tongue. Everyone's entitled to put their foot in their mouth.
Everybody is.
And
Exactly. Everybody
not
is.
everything needs an apology.
Thank goodness for that, right? And I mean, that what you just said, that's an indicator of that secure attachment. It's like you
Exactly.
don't need her to apologize to you because of a bad habit she might have in her interactional stance, right? And
Yeah.
you know,
One other thing I want to say about secure attachments is that, there's been a lot of research on secure attachments and how being attached and going back to the narrative, to the life narrative, which is really important. And in fact, I've just read something about PTSD, which I'm sure you'll know, but maybe it's too much of a derailing topic. But having this narrative means being connected to your ancestry too. It means knowing your grandparents, your parents, knowing their story, because as we connect to others beyond us, it gives us some sense of awe and humility when you know your ancestors and you can see the continuity over time, and it also helps you understand patterns of behavior that you pick up from them that get transmitted through dynastically, which I could also give you many examples because it sounds very esoteric, but it's pretty simple to understand if you want an example. But it's very important to connect to ancestry. There were studies, a famous study by Fibush and Duke out of Emory University. They found that adolescents who are connected to their history, who know a lot about their parents and their grandparents, did much better after traumatic events. They had much more autonomy. They became much more independent. They had agency. And agency and being empowered is probably one of the key ingredients to happiness. I mean, if we want to call a life happy, I think agency and gratitude are probably some of the most important components to leading a contented life. And so I just wanted to say that the connecting to ancestries, and it was personally very important for me because I had a lost generation during the Holocaust. Everyone was killed, and so I didn't have that continuity. But going back and knowing about my great grandparents and things that I was able to piece together was very helpful because it gives you a sense of being. It's an existential thing about being part of a world that's much bigger than you, that connects you, and that we're all kind of connected. So I thought that was an important thing to comment about.
That's just beautiful, and it just speaks so much again to this whole idea of, resiliency and where we're going to find it. Like we have to, if it isn't there already, we have to have these strategies to find it so that we have capacity and we can grow capacity. One last question, because this is a very curious one, and we only have 3 minutes to go. So
Okay.
this is from Stan. He says, I have an acquaintance that is always blaming someone else for his issues and mistakes. What do I say to him? Grow up?
That's a good start. You say grow up. Well, get over yourself. Exactly. Well, that's what I'm trying to help people do, just to get over themselves and grow up. There are people that just cannot take any responsibility, but that's also because they're scapegoaters. I mean, look, human beings have a tendency to disavow, disconnect, get rid of things that they don't like about themselves. We extrude parts of ourselves and throw them at someone else like a hot potato. And that's what people do, because we're an organism that strives to survive with the least amount of energy output. We want to protect ourselves from any kind of pain. That includes physical, emotional, any kind of pain. I mean, if you put your hand near a flame, you're going to automatically withdraw your hand. That's called conservation withdrawal. We protect ourselves so we can survive. And so this guy, for whatever reason, his AMC is something that makes him, the response, the outcome is what you would see as a sign of a personality issue, where all he can do is blame someone else. Something happens to him when he tries to consider his own role. So people like that often end up in therapy because they have no friends, or they have no one likes them, because they just finger point. So I guess the point is that I'm trying to make is, if all we do is point our finger to other people, we live in the dark and we're clueless, and we can't develop ourselves and develop our own and know our own minds. And if we spend more time pointing our finger inwards and looking inwards, we could do much better in the world, and this guy wouldn't be that way. So I mean, the next question to ask yourself is, why are you friends with, like, what kind of friendship is this? Is this just because, if maybe you have an issue picking good people for yourself? I mean, I know I did. I used to pick people that needed me, and I became depleted. I'm an over-empathic, hyper-empathic, which is not good, because you have no barriers and you just soak everything up. So, we all have issues about being too empathetic, too not empathetic, blaming. So yeah, you can tell them to grow up, or you can just figure out what's in it for you.
I love that. Yes, absolutely. This has been a very interesting conversation. I'm so grateful that you were able to join us today. Is there anything that you want to close with, anything that you want our readers, our listeners to know? And I'm going to say again, Dr. Jacqueline Heller's book is Yesterday Never Sleeps. I know it's available through Amazon or anywhere else, and there's some postings on Goodreads. Any last words?
Well, I did want to thank you for having me. It was delightful to speak with you, and thank your listenership and for great questions. I just want to say, keep hope alive, because there's always some way to empower yourself to do better. And the answer lies within. It's not by looking at someone else and asking them. I'm not saying you shouldn't ask for help when needed, but don't think you're not capable to do some things on your own. And there is some work you can do. And go with the flow.
Thank you so much. Be well.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Take care of yourself and be gentle. Thank you for your time. And
my pleasure.
Be well. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with your host, Dr. Anna Baranowski, right here on Reality Radio 101.